Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
From the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom, this is The Gateway. It's Wednesday, June 4th. I'm Arla Kuziz. A bill backed by agricultural giant Bayer was one of many bills that didn't cross the finish line this past Missouri legislative session. Bayer's herbicide Roundup has been subject to tens of thousands of lawsuits alleging it causes cancer. The bill would have protected the company from some of that litigation. Governor Mike Kehoe is among those who supported the bill.
I was disappointed that bill didn't get passed. It's very important to many of our ag producers across the state, as well as the actual manufacturers that make those products.
St. Louis Public Radio's Evie Lewis reports on the arguments for and against the bill and what its future might be. That's coming up after this news on The Gateway. A Missouri Senate committee has advanced a bill that allows the state to partially pay for new stadiums for the Kansas City Chiefs and Royals. The committee passed the legislation on a vote of 6-3 yesterday. It now goes to the full Senate for debate. The legislation is estimated to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The bill is a response to legislation passed by the Kansas legislature, which offers to pay 70% of the cost of building new stadiums. Senator Curtis Gregory is the sponsor of the bill.
I firmly believe these are Missouri's teams, and if Missouri doesn't have an offer on the table for the teams to even consider, that will speak for itself and how we view them and what they bring to our state and our economy.
Through the Missouri bill, total state dollars would not exceed 50% of total project costs. A Missouri Senate committee also advanced a budget bill that includes money for storm relief. But as St. Louis Public Radio's Sarah Kellogg reports, some senators are already saying it's not enough funding.
The Senate Appropriations Committee voted 12-0 to advance the bill. It includes $25 million in state funding to go towards housing disaster aid for storm relief. The money could go to not only St. Louis, which experienced a deadly tornado in May, but other storm-affected areas. The funding will be available on a first-come, first-served basis. Republican Senator Jason Bean says he believes the $25 million is a good start, but is also a drop in the bucket. Bean also says he wants the state response to be quick.
We need to be working in business speed, not government speed, because, these people, they're homeless. They have nothing, and like I say, they're non-insured.
After the vote, Senate Appropriations Chair Lincoln Huff said the legislation is still a work in progress. In Jefferson City, I'm Sarah Kellogg, St. Louis Public Radio.
Meanwhile, in St. Louis, the Board of Aldermen gave its approval to help renters displaced by the May 16th tornado. The board voted yesterday to make those individuals eligible for the city's Impacted Tenants Fund. They can apply for money from the fund to cover one-time expenses like security deposits. There's enough money available to help about 200 renters. Aldermen are trying to use reserve funds to more than quadruple that number. The city selected a vendor to run the program in the fall, but applications are still not available. Mayor Kara Spencer said Monday she did not have a timeline. St. Louis NAACP leaders worry that insurance companies often create more barriers for Black homeowners to obtain insurance coverage. Leaders are looking to local and state officials for help. St. Louis Public Radio's Andrea Henderson has more.
St. Louis NAACP is urging state legislators to pass estate and legacy protections for homeowners. Adolphus Pruitt is the organization's president. He says those protections could ensure homeowners are covered for unexpected financial setbacks, such as those severely impacted by the recent tornado. Pruitt says the chapter came up with solutions for city and state leaders.
It is in the best interest of the city and the property owner that they fully insure, because if they're not, and the home is damaged beyond repair, the city's losing residents.
This civil rights organization also wants lawmakers to enforce state insurance agencies to report all activity. I'm Andrea Henderson, St. Louis Public Radio.
St. Louis is no longer separating recycling to save resources in the aftermath of the May 16 tornado. The city recycling service said it will collect recyclables and green waste along with trash until the end of June. St. Louisans can instead drop off their recycling at residential drop-off sites to make sure it's collected. We have a map of those sites at stlpr.org. Construction of a North St. Louis farmers market is near completion with the help of a new Washington University initiative. The school's public design workshop includes 10 students. They'll create a prototype for decorative screens that will surround the Be Well Cafe and Market Pavilion in the Hyde Park neighborhood. Fatima Mohammed is founder of the Cafe and Market. She says the market has hosted pop-up events over the past few years, but the pavilion will give it a permanent space.
The market will now be for artisans, the artists, the jewelry makers, the body butters, that kind of thing. And it will also be a space for outdoor events.
Mohammed will hire a contractor to build the pavilion off of the prototypes. She expects it to open this summer. For families caught in the immigration system, the challenges don't end with detention. St. Louis Public Radio's Brian Munoz reports on a St. Louis mother who was finally able to lay her son to rest after roughly 2 months.
Sunlight illuminates stained glass windows at St. Cecilia Catholic Church as Lucy Garzon leads a processional alongside her family. Her son, Brian Garzon Rayo's ashes sit in an urn draped with a white cloth at the front of the church. He fled violence in Colombia, but in April, while in ICE custody, he died by suicide. For weeks, his remains went unclaimed in rural Crawford County, but with the help of local nonprofits, Brian was finally laid to rest Tuesday.
Ya que ha sido pues como mucho tiempo esperando este momento, entonces siento algo de paz.
That's Lucy Garzon. She says she's waited for this moment for a long time. Now, she feels some peace. I'm Brian Munoz, St. Louis Public Radio.
One of the many bills that didn't cross the finish line this past Missouri legislative session was one backed by agricultural giant Bayer. The bill would have shielded Bayer from liability in some lawsuits where its herbicide Roundup has been accused of causing cancer. With the end of the regular legislative session, the bill is dead for now, but as St. Louis Public Radio's Evie Lewis reports, it's likely not the last Missouri will hear of the issue.
Standing by the side of Highway 63 southbound with the Missouri State Capitol in view on the horizon, there's a billboard that says, "Stand up for glyphosate." Glyphosate is the key ingredient of Roundup, the flagship herbicide of Monsanto. Monsanto was based in St. Louis until it was purchased by German company Bayer in 2018. Monsanto, and now Bayer, have been subject to tens of thousands of lawsuits alleging they didn't warn customers that exposure to Roundup could cause cancer. There's no scientific consensus that Roundup is a carcinogen, but judgments and settlements have still cost Bayer billions. A bill introduced by Republican Representative Dane Deal of Butler this year would have insulated Bayer and other chemical companies from those lawsuits.
You know, when the amount of litigation out there starts, almost hampering or changing a business model, you have to look from a business standpoint of what has to change.
In other words, since the EPA has not concluded that Roundup can cause cancer, litigants would be unable to claim in court that they weren't properly warned about cancer risks.
So it was approved with the data 25 years ago that Monsanto submitted at the time.
That's Brenda Pikulis, a retired University of Missouri professor of biochemistry. As a volunteer for the city of Columbia, she uses glyphosate to manage invasive plants. She says that since more independent studies have been done since Roundup's initial EPA approval, the company should be required to attach more warnings.
I am informed. And every bottle I get says caution contains glyphosate. The city will do this for me. Why will the company not do it for my neighbor who goes to the hardware store to buy it?
The EPA is currently in the process of updating its glyphosate registration to incorporate more recent science. Glyphosate is important to what's called no-till farming, where weeds are controlled with methods like herbicides rather than through tillage. No-till farming is popular because it preserves soil and prevents erosion. At a press conference after the session ended, Governor Mike Kehoe said it was important to make sure glyphosate remains available as a tool for farmers.
I was disappointed that bill didn't get passed. It's very important to many of our ag producers across the state, as well as the actual manufacturers that make those products.
Supporters of the legislation, including Kehoe, say the lawsuits against Bayer are driven by lawyers seeking lucrative settlements. Jess Christensen, Bayer's head of crop science communication, says that the bill wouldn't represent blanket immunity for the company. Bayer could still be sued over charges like negligence, just not over failure to warn.
Of course, people should have their day in court. This language is really specific to the labeling requirements that we as companies are held to by the EPA.
Democratic Representative Adrian Plank of Columbia opposed the bill. He says Bayer's push to block lawsuits is driven by corporate greed.
It's an investment for them to buy politicians and policy because it'll save them money in the long run. They lost the last 4 lawsuits to the tune of $11 billion and was able to pay it.
The bill passed the House this session by a vote of 85 to 72, just 3 votes over the threshold for passage. House Republicans were split on the bill, with 24 voting against. But that momentum was halted in the Senate when mailers were sent to the districts of some of the most conservative Republican senators, urging them to support the bill. The 9 senators targeted held a press conference, saying they wouldn't be pressured into supporting the legislation. One of those senators, Nick Schroer of Defiance, says granting legal immunity to any corporation violates Missourians' rights.
I think, as long as it's going to provide some form of immunity or some form of legal protection for makers of products in the state of Missouri that could possibly injure our constituents, it's not going to be something we're going to support.
Similar legislation backed by Bayer passed in North Dakota and Georgia earlier this year. Christensen says Bayer is keeping options open regarding what Missouri legislation it will endorse in the next cycle. I'm Evie Lewis, St. Louis Public Radio.
Our Fred Ehrlich edited that report. The Gateway is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, a listener-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Music is by Ryan McNeely of Adult Fur. I'm Arla Kuziz, and from the St. Louis Public Radio newsroom, this has been The Gateway.